she texted, "Shopping all day, be home late." I replied, "Tell your friend's husband I said hi." 12 minutes later, she was standing at the door, breathless and shaking. The foundation of our 9-year marriage had always been built on trust and transparency, which made the recent changes in Paige's behavior feel like watching a familiar house slowly develop cracks in its walls. I was sitting in my home office reviewing quarterly reports when Paige's latest text came through, delivered with the same casual tone I'd been seeing for 3 months straight. "Hey babe, meeting Savannah for some retail therapy at the outlets. Probably won't be back until evening. Love you." Followed by a string of shopping bag emojis that felt increasingly performative each time I saw them. Savannah had become Paige's constant companion lately, or at least that's what my wife wanted me to believe. Every weekend shopping expedition, every impromptu girls' night, every extended absence from our suburban home somehow involved this mysterious friend who had materialized in our lives like morning fog. The strange thing was, despite hearing elaborate stories about Savannah's opinions on everything from skincare routines to restaurant recommendations, I'd never actually met this influential friend. No photos existed on Paige's phone, no mention of her last name ever slipped into conversation, no stories about her background or how they'd supposedly become such inseparable companions. When I'd casually suggested we invite Savannah and her husband over for a barbecue dinner, Paige's reaction was immediate and telling. Her shoulders tensed, her smile became forced, and she quickly deflected with, "She's really private about her personal life, you know how some people are," before immediately changing the subject to something mundane about needing new curtains for the living room. That conversation happened 6 weeks ago, and it planted a seed of doubt that had been growing steadily in my mind ever since. The pattern was becoming too convenient, too predictable, too perfectly timed. Paige would announce these extended shopping trips with Savannah, disappear for 6 to 8 hours, then return home with maybe one small purchase from a discount store that didn't justify an entire day of supposed retail therapy. Her explanations always sounded rehearsed, like she'd spent the drive home practicing her story in the car before walking through our front door. Last weekend, she'd claimed they spent 4 hours browsing 3 different malls but came home with only a single tube of lipstick from the corner drugstore. When I gently pointed out the inconsistency between the time spent and the minimal purchases, she laughed it off with forced lightness and said they'd mostly been window shopping and catching up over expensive coffee at various cafes. But something in her eyes didn't match the casual tone of her voice, and the way she avoided direct eye contact told me everything I needed to know. I'd been married to Paige long enough to recognize the subtle tells when she was hiding something, and lately, that uncomfortable feeling had become impossible to ignore or rationalize away. So when today's text arrived with the familiar Savannah excuse, I decided to conduct a simple but revealing experiment. Instead of my usual supportive, "Have fun, see you tonight," response, I typed something different. "Tell Savannah's husband I said hi." I hit send and watched as the message immediately showed as read within seconds. Then I sat back in my leather chair and waited to see exactly what would happen next. Exactly 12 minutes after I'd sent that test message, I heard the distinctive sound of Paige's Honda Civic pulling into our driveway with unusual urgency, the engine revving higher than normal and brakes squealing slightly as she came to an abrupt stop. Through my office window, I watched her practically sprint from the car to our front door, fumbling with her keys in a way that suggested genuine panic rather than her usual composed demeanor. The front door burst open with enough force to rattle the picture frames in our entryway, and I heard her calling my name with a breathless quality that immediately confirmed my worst suspicions. "Mitchell! Mitchell, are you home?" Her voice carried that particular pitch that meant she was trying to sound casual while clearly being anything but. I remained seated at my desk, continuing to review the same financial document I'd been staring at for the past 12 minutes, and called back calmly, "In the office, just finishing up some work." The sound of her heels clicking rapidly across our hardwood floors grew louder as she approached, and when she appeared in my doorway, the sight was almost comical in its obviousness. Paige was visibly flustered, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed red, and her breathing labored as if she'd just finished running a marathon instead of driving home from supposed shopping. "I forgot my credit card," she announced with forced brightness. pressing one hand against the doorframe to steady herself while trying to appear nonchalant. Had to come back and get it before the stores close. I looked up from my papers with deliberate slowness, studying her face with the same analytical attention I applied to financial statements. That's strange, I said evenly, because your wallet is sitting right there on the kitchen counter where you always leave it. I watched as the color drained from her face, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. The silence stretched between us for several seconds, and I could practically see her mind racing to construct a new explanation that might salvage the situation. I meant my other credit card, she stammered, her voice losing its confident edge. The one from my purse, not my main wallet. I stood up slowly from my chair, maintaining eye contact as I moved past her toward the kitchen. Let's go check that wallet, shall we? Her footsteps followed reluctantly behind me, and when we reached the kitchen counter, I picked up her leather wallet and opened it methodically. Every credit card was accounted for, sitting neatly in their designated slots exactly where they belonged. Seems like all your cards are here, I observed, setting the wallet back down with deliberate precision. So where exactly were you rushing back from, and why did my message about Savannah's husband send you into such a panic? The question hung in the air like smoke, and I watched as Paige's carefully constructed facade finally began to crumble completely. Her hands started trembling slightly, and she gripped the edge of the kitchen counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction whatsoever. Mitchell, why would you even say something like that? I leaned against the opposite counter, crossing my arms and studying her with the patience of someone who already knew the answers to the questions he was asking. Because there is no Savannah, is there? The silence that followed my questions stretched for what felt like an eternity before Paige finally broke down and admitted the truth, though she tried to minimize the damage even as she confessed. Okay, fine, she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Savannah isn't exactly a friend. It's Sebastian, someone from work, but Mitchell, nothing physical has happened between us, I swear. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as the pieces finally clicked into place, though I maintained my calm exterior while processing this confirmation of my worst fears. Sebastian, I repeated slowly, testing the name on my tongue. Let me guess, 30-something, recently divorced, works in your marketing department? The look of shock that crossed her face told me everything I needed to know, and I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction at having solved this puzzle through careful observation and logical deduction. How did you know that? She whispered, sinking onto one of our kitchen stools as if her legs could no longer support her weight. I walked over to my laptop, which I'd left open on the breakfast bar, and turned the screen toward her with deliberate slowness. Because I've been conducting my own investigation for the past month, Paige. When someone you love starts lying to you consistently, you tend to notice patterns. The screen displayed Sebastian Caldwell's Instagram profile, complete with his professional headshot and recent posts that painted a clear picture of his lifestyle and activities. Sebastian Caldwell, 31 years old, marketing coordinator at your firm, divorced 8 months ago, lives in that new complex downtown near Riverside Cafe. I scrolled through several of his recent posts with methodical precision, watching Paige's face grow paler with each revelation. Here's a particularly interesting post from 2 Saturdays ago, when you claimed to be shopping with Savannah at the mall. Sebastian checked in at Riverside Cafe at 2:47 p.m. with the caption, "Perfect afternoon for coffee and conversation." I turned the laptop toward myself and continued scrolling. And here's your car, a silver Honda Civic with license plate number ending in 847. Parked right outside that same cafe in the background of his photo. Amazing coincidence, don't you think? Paige's tears were flowing freely now, but I felt no sympathy, only a strange sense of vindication mixed with profound disappointment. Mitchell, I can explain everything, she pleaded, reaching across the counter toward me. It started as just friendly conversations at work, and then we began meeting for coffee to talk about his divorce. He was going through such a hard time, and I felt sorry for him. I held up a hand to stop her explanation, my patience finally wearing thin after months of deception and manipulation. Stop. Just stop with the excuses and explanations. I don't want to hear about how innocent your secret meetings were or how you were just being a good friend to a lonely divorce. I closed the laptop with a decisive snap and looked directly into her eyes. What I want to see is your phone. All of it. Every message, every call log, every social media interaction. If this relationship is as innocent as you claim, then you shouldn't have any problem showing me everything. The way her face immediately changed, shifting from tearful remorse to defensive panic, told me exactly what I would find if she actually handed over that device. "That's an invasion of privacy, Mitchell," she said, unconsciously clutching her purse closer to her body. "You can't just demand to go through my personal communications like some kind of detective." I stared at her for a long moment, feeling the last vestiges of trust finally crumble into dust. "Privacy died the moment you started lying about your whereabouts and secretly meeting with another man, Paige. Transparency is the only thing that might save this marriage now." The standoff continued for another 20 minutes before Paige finally relented, reluctantly placing her iPhone on the kitchen counter between us like she was surrendering a weapon in a negotiation. Her hands shook as she unlocked the device, and I could see her mind racing, probably trying to remember what incriminating evidence might be hiding in her digital communications. "There," she said, sliding the phone toward me with obvious reluctance. "Look through whatever you want, but you're not going to find anything inappropriate." I picked up the device with the same methodical care I applied to reviewing financial documents, knowing that the truth would reveal itself through patterns and details that most people overlook. What I discovered in the first 5 minutes of scrolling through her messages with Sebastian made my stomach turn, not because of any explicit content, but because of the emotional intimacy and obvious romantic undertones that permeated every conversation. The text thread stretched back nearly 4 months, starting with seemingly innocent work-related discussions that gradually evolved into deeply personal exchanges about feelings, dreams, and dissatisfaction with current circumstances. "I feel so trapped sometimes," read one message from Paige dated just 2 weeks ago. "Like I'm living someone else's idea of what my life should be instead of following my own heart." Sebastian's response was equally revealing. "You deserve to be with someone who sees your true worth and appreciates the amazing woman you really are. Don't settle for less than extraordinary." I continued scrolling, documenting the most damaging exchanges by taking screenshots and forwarding them to my own phone before Paige could change her mind about this transparency. The messages revealed not just an emotional affair, but a complete emotional withdrawal from our marriage as she invested her feelings and energy into this new relationship. "I wish I had met you 5 years ago," Paige had written just last week. "Everything would have been so different. So much better." Sebastian's reply was immediate and encouraging. "It's never too late to choose happiness, Paige. Some people are worth taking risks for." The most devastating message thread occurred during our wedding anniversary dinner last month, when I thought we were having a pleasant evening reconnecting over good food and wine. While I was sitting across from her, trying to reminisce about our early dating years, she was secretly texting Sebastian under the table, "Sitting here pretending to be happy while all I can think about is being with you instead. This feels like such a lie." I looked up from the phone to find Paige watching my face with growing panic, probably realizing that her carefully constructed version of events was crumbling with each message I read. "Still think this was just friendly coffee conversations?" I asked quietly, continuing to scroll through months of intimate exchanges that read like love letters between two people planning a future together. "Mitchell, those messages don't mean what you think they mean," she said desperately, reaching across the counter toward the phone. "We were both going through difficult times and just supporting each other emotionally." I pulled the device away from her reach and continued documenting the evidence, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. "Here's an interesting one from 3 days ago," I said, reading directly from the screen. Sebastian writes, "Can't wait until we don't have to hide this anymore. You deserve to be loved openly and completely." And your response was, "Soon. I just need to figure out the right way to handle things at home." The color drained completely from Paige's face as she realized I was reading the most recent and damaging communications, the ones that revealed they weren't just having an emotional affair but actively planning for a future together. "You've been planning to leave me," I continued, my voice remaining steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. This isn't some innocent friendship that got out of hand. This is a calculated relationship with someone who's been actively encouraging you to end our marriage. I finished forwarding the most incriminating evidence to my own phone and set her device back on the counter with deliberate finality. Pack a bag, Paige. I want you out of this house tonight. The next morning, after Paige had reluctantly gathered her belongings and left to stay with her sister, I began implementing a strategic plan that would protect my interests and ensure that the consequences of her choices extended beyond just our marriage. My first call was to Rebecca Thompson, the most respected divorce attorney in our city, whose reputation for thoroughness and aggressive representation made her worth every penny of her substantial hourly rate. Mr. Patterson, she said after reviewing the screenshots I'd forwarded to her secure email, this is some of the most comprehensive evidence of emotional infidelity I've seen in 15 years of practice. Your wife essentially documented her own affair and her intention to abandon the marriage. The consultation confirmed what I already suspected: our house, which was solely in my name due to my superior credit score when we'd purchased it, would remain mine, and the evidence would likely prevent any significant alimony claims. My second strategic move was changing the locks on our house, a decision that felt both practical and symbolically important as I watched the locksmith install new deadbolts that Paige's keys would no longer open. I spent the afternoon methodically packing her remaining belongings into clearly labeled boxes, taking photos of everything for inventory purposes before stacking them neatly in the garage for her eventual pickup. But my most satisfying strategic decision involved Sebastian himself, and I spent considerable time crafting a professional LinkedIn message that would create maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability. Hello, Sebastian, I wrote. I'm Mitchell Patterson, Paige's husband. I wanted to reach out professionally to discuss some recent developments that I believe may interest both you and your colleagues. I've become aware of your close working relationship with my wife, and I thought it might be appropriate to share some communications that demonstrate the depth of your collaboration. Please let me know if you'd like to discuss this matter further, either privately or with HR present. I attached selected screenshots of their most romantic exchanges, carefully chosen to be damaging without being explicitly sexual, then sent the message during peak business hours when it would be most likely to be seen by other connections in his network. The response was immediate and panic-stricken. Mr. Patterson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please call me so we can discuss this privately. Instead of responding, I sent a similar message to Paige's direct supervisor, Sharon Williams, whom I'd met at several company holiday parties over the years. Hi Sharon, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to bring to your attention some communications between my wife Paige and her colleague Sebastian that may constitute a violation of your company's workplace conduct policies. I believe HR should be aware of this situation, as it has created a hostile work environment for other employees who have had to cover for their frequent absences. The fallout was swift and devastating. Within 48 hours, I received a call from Paige that confirmed my strategy had worked perfectly. Mitchell, what have you done? She sobbed into the phone. Sebastian got called into HR this morning, and now everyone at work knows about us. They're talking about transferring him to a different department, and my boss wants to meet with me on Monday about maintaining professional boundaries. I listened to her distress with the same detached interest I might show toward a quarterly earnings report that didn't meet expectations. I shared factual information about a situation that was affecting workplace productivity, I replied calmly. If that creates problems for you and Sebastian, perhaps you should have considered those consequences before conducting a secret relationship during work hours. The social consequences were equally satisfying. Paige's parents, who had initially been supportive of their daughter and critical of my overreaction, changed their tune completely after I forwarded them the same evidence I'd sent to the attorney. Her mother called me personally to apologize and express her disappointment in Paige's choices, while her father sent a brief text. You deserved better than this, Mitchell. Sorry we raised her to think this was acceptable behavior. Even Paige's sister Emma, who had been hosting her since she'd moved out, began setting boundaries after seeing the evidence of the emotional affair. I told her she can stay through the weekend, Emma informed me during a brief phone call, But I'm not going to be part of enabling this kind of destructive behavior. She needs to figure out her own living situation. 2 weeks after Paige had moved out, our mutual friend David called to invite me to what he described as a casual dinner gathering at Antonio's Italian restaurant, the same place where our friend group had celebrated birthdays, promotions, and anniversaries for the past 5 years. Just a small group, he said, Rebecca, Tom and Lisa, maybe a few others. Nothing formal, just good food and catching up. What David didn't mention, and what I suspected from the slightly awkward tone in his voice, was that Paige would also be attending, probably hoping to control the narrative about our separation before I could share my side of the story. I arrived at Antonio's 15 minutes early and chose a seat at our usual large corner table with a clear view of the entrance, positioning myself strategically so I could observe Paige's reaction when she realized I was there. When she walked through the door 20 minutes later, accompanied by Rebecca, who had clearly been recruited as moral support, the shock on her face was immediate and obvious. She'd probably expected me to avoid social gatherings, to retreat and hide while she spun whatever version of events would make her look like the victim rather than the perpetrator. "Mitchell," she said with forced brightness as she approached the table, "I didn't know you were coming tonight." Her voice carried that artificial cheerfulness people use when they're trying to appear unaffected by something that's clearly devastating them. "David invited me," I replied evenly, standing up to shake hands with Tom and Lisa as they arrived. Seemed like a good opportunity to see everyone and share some updates about what's been happening in my life lately. I watched as Paige's face went slightly pale, probably realizing that her plan to present her carefully crafted version of our marriage's end was about to be complicated by my presence and my access to actual evidence. As our friends settled around the table and ordered drinks, the conversation naturally turned to our separation, with Rebecca immediately jumping in to support Paige's predetermined narrative. "Poor Paige has been going through such a difficult time," Rebecca began, reaching over to squeeze Paige's hand supportively. "Mitchell's been so controlling lately, questioning her every move, demanding to know where she goes and who she talks to. She felt like she couldn't even have friendships without being interrogated." I listened to this characterization with genuine fascination, impressed by how skillfully Paige had twisted the truth to make her secretive behavior seem like my problem rather than hers. "That's an interesting perspective," I said calmly, pulling out my phone and placing it on the table. "Would you like to hear what actually happened, or should I just let Rebecca continue with the fictional version?" The tension at the table became immediately palpable, with Tom and Lisa exchanging confused glances while David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mitchell, please," Paige said quietly, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "Let's not do this here. These are our friends, not a courtroom." I smiled at her with the same professional politeness I used during difficult business negotiations. "You're absolutely right, Paige. These are our friends, which means they deserve to know the truth about why our marriage ended rather than being fed a carefully constructed lie designed to make you look like a victim." I picked up my phone and opened the screenshot folder I'd organized specifically for this moment. "Here's a text message Paige sent to her colleague Sebastian 3 days ago," I said, reading directly from the screen. "I can't wait until we don't have to hide this anymore. Being with you feels like the first honest thing I've done in years." The silence that followed was deafening, and I watched as Rebecca's supportive expression slowly transformed into confusion and then dawning realization. "And here's Sebastian's response," I continued, scrolling to the next message. "You deserve to be loved completely and openly, not hidden away like some guilty secret. Soon we'll be able to build the life we've been talking about." Tom was the first to break the stunned silence. "Wait, who is Sebastian?" he asked, looking back and forth between Paige and me with obvious bewilderment. "Sebastian is Paige's colleague," I explained matter-of-factly, "the man she's been secretly meeting for coffee dates that she told me were shopping trips with her friend Savannah. Savannah who, as it turns out, doesn't actually exist." I continued reading selected messages aloud, watching as our friends' expressions shifted from confusion to shock to disappointment. Rebecca, who had been so quick to defend Paige's supposed victimhood, slowly withdrew her hand and leaned back in her chair. "Paige," she said quietly, "you told me Mitchell was being paranoid and controlling. You said he was imagining problems that didn't exist." Paige's carefully constructed facade was finally crumbling under the weight of actual evidence, and she looked around the table with growing desperation as she realized that her attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. "It's not what it looks like," she said weakly, but her voice carried no conviction. "Mitchell's taking those messages out of context." I set my phone down and looked directly at her across the table. "Then please, by all means, provide the context that makes planning a future with another man while lying to your husband seem reasonable." The dinner ended with Paige leaving alone, her support system having evaporated as quickly as it had formed once the truth became clear. The divorce proceedings concluded with remarkable efficiency once Paige realized that her evidence-supported adultery made any prolonged legal battle both expensive and futile. 3 months after that disastrous dinner at Antonio's, we met in Rebecca Thompson's office to sign the final papers, with Paige agreeing to relinquish all claims to our shared assets in exchange for a quick and quiet resolution that would spare her further public humiliation. "Mrs. Patterson," Rebecca had explained during our mediation session, "given the comprehensive documentation of your emotional affair and your explicit plans to abandon the marriage, any contested proceeding would likely result in a far less favorable outcome for you." Paige signed the documents without meeting my eyes, her signature barely legible as if she was trying to make herself invisible during the process. Within 6 weeks of finalizing the divorce, I made the decision to sell our suburban house, a choice that felt both practically and emotionally necessary as I began building a completely new life for myself. The real estate market was strong, and I netted a substantial profit that allowed me to purchase a sleek downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern amenities that represented everything I wanted my new life to become. The contrast between my old married life and my new independence was remarkable, and I found myself genuinely excited about the future for the first time in months. Meanwhile, the consequences for Sebastian had been even more severe than I'd anticipated, with the professional fallout extending far beyond simple workplace gossip. According to mutual acquaintances who still worked at Paige's marketing firm, Sebastian had been quietly transferred to their branch office in Portland, a move that was officially described as a career development opportunity, but which everyone understood was essentially corporate exile. The isolation from his established social and professional networks had apparently overwhelmed him, and he'd cut all contact with Paige within weeks of relocating, leaving her to face the aftermath of their affair completely alone. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I encountered Paige at the Whole Foods near my new loft, our first face-to-face interaction since signing the papers in Rebecca's office. She was standing in the produce section, looking noticeably thinner and older, her once immaculate appearance now showing the wear of someone who'd been ground down by circumstances beyond her control. When she spotted me examining organic apples, her expression flickered between surprise, embarrassment, and what might have been genuine regret. "Mitchell," she said softly, approaching with the hesitant steps of someone unsure of their reception. "How are you doing?" I turned to face her with polite interest, noting how different she looked from the confident woman who'd once demanded to know why I was questioning her whereabouts. "I'm doing very well, actually," I replied honestly. "The new place downtown is fantastic, and work's been great. How about you?" She shifted her weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with the casual nature of our interaction. "I'm staying with my cousin Jennifer temporarily while I look for my own place," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "The job market's been challenging, especially since I had to leave my position at the firm." I nodded with the same polite attention I might show a former colleague sharing career updates. "That sounds difficult. I hope things work out for you." The conversation lasted only a few more minutes, filled with the kind of awkward small talk that occurs between people who once shared everything and now had nothing meaningful to say to each other. As I walked away with my groceries, I realized that I felt completely neutral about seeing her, neither angry nor sad, just indifferent to someone who'd once been the center of my world. Later that evening, sitting in my loft with the city lights twinkling below, I reflected on how profoundly my life had changed since that moment when I decided to test her honesty with a simple message about Savannah's husband. The woman who'd once made me feel grateful for her attention had taught me an invaluable lesson about recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept treatment that fell short of what I deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from a colleague inviting me to a weekend hiking trip, and as I typed my acceptance, I realized that the future I was building felt infinitely more authentic and promising than anything I'd lost.